This is Stand Up for the Truth, addressing important issues and topics affecting Christians across the nation.
Today is Tuesday, July 9, 2024. Holly Varnum was supposed to join the podcast today, but lost her voice because of a cold. So Mary Danielsen is here with headlines with a biblical perspective on that. Good thing about headline shows is there's always something to talk about.
Yeah, indeed.
They just stack up.
They do stack up, and I'm glad you said that, because whenever there's a holiday, especially an extended weekend American holiday, the press also takes a break, and editorialists take a break, and so there isn't always a lot right after. So between today and Thursday, which is my regularly scheduled headline day, we're going to catch up on everything.
Yeah, and it's going to be an exciting month.
Yeah.
Seems like after the presidential debate, a lot of things are just unraveling right before
unraveling,
our eyes.
Cranking up, indeed. And we're going to talk about all that today. And Holly Varnum, she has been rescheduled for August the 6th. She's with Reasons for Hope. We've had several guests from there on, Juan Valdez, Carl Kirby, many other guests, and she is also on staff there. So we're excited that she can still be with us the first part of August. Today is July 9th. It's the 190th day of 2024. Halfway point was July the 2nd. So what's in store for the second half? Well, stand by. I'm going to open with a scripture as always, Psalm 121. We're going to pray, and then we're going to jump in. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth, even forevermore. Oh, Lord, you are from everlasting to everlasting. Thank you that you preserve us from evil. You preserve our souls, that you watch over us and guide us with great care and loving kindness. We lift up those who are ill, Lord, for a touch from you. Also for anyone who is affected by the recent bad weather, for the flooding, locally or nationally, as the case may be, for all the details involved in recovering from damages. We thank you that no one died from that locally. We pray for our nation as well in these challenging times. Lord, even though things appear to be unraveling, we know you have all things in hand, and the hearts of those who lead us are under your watch to accomplish all that you desire. We long to see you, Lord, perhaps today. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to start out today with an article from Gatestone Institute, a site that continually provides great political editorial and well-thought-out insights regarding both U.S. and especially Israeli politics. I've been reading them for many years, and they never fail to challenge my thinking on the issues of the day. This first article is fascinating, and it speaks of the mystery that is Washington, D.C. politics, particularly over the last couple of election cycles. We look at some of the people who win presidential and congressional races. They get into power along with their crazy worldviews in tow, dangerous worldviews, actually. And we might ask ourselves, how in the world did they win anything? I can't picture my fellow Americans voting for these people. And we think, has the electorate and the voting public completely lost their minds? Because outcomes have been puzzling. So why don't the people that we expect to win actually win? Why hasn't the GOP ever retaken anything during midterms? And this goes back several years. Nothing ever makes sense on the morning after a big election anymore. I think of AOC, for one, as a politician who is puzzling to me, and her squad. And there are many more cases of disappointing outcomes. And disappointment on the level depends on your expectations of the outcomes. And, of course, this article I'm going to read is not the final word in U.S. politics. Nothing really is, because it's always on the way to something else. But God is ultimately in charge of it all. We know that. People, and particularly politicians, are so easily compromised and bought out for the sake of agendas and personal gain that we shouldn't really wonder why the top dogs in any given race are generally corrupt. We might say to ourselves, when it comes down to those we're left to vote for, why these two? Quality candidates for very important offices like running the free world are few and far between. I sometimes ask, no, every time I ask myself, is this the best the parties can come up with to nominate for the leader of the free world? And maybe you think that too from time to time. Maybe you haven't vocalized it, but it's in the back of your mind somewhere. And then have you also wondered why it takes so much money to win a political office? How much is too much? What do they spend it on? What if there's any left over? They spend it on salaries and travel and ads that are so malicious and double-tongued we can't wait until the election is over to be free of them, because they run every 2 minutes. Local news. I remember when election cycles weren't nearly this dreadful or divisive. So the U.S. political leviathan is only one portion of the landscape of this world's system, and it's certain that there's far more to it than we can fathom. But while this is true, we also have local government, and there's far more to our lives than national elections day to day, but it dominates the news cycles. So if you want to have a complete thought on it, you're going to have to wade through a lot of misdirection and fabrication. So before I take a bite, or a nibble actually, out of national politics, my intent up front is never to dissuade anyone from voting, because the American people are going to have their say, and they should have their say, because it has to do with consciences and world views. We're watching as believers what God has to say about it when all the shouting is over. And like all we do, we have to leave the results to God. But we do things day after day that we leave the results to God, and voting should be the same. But we need to vote our convictions. And so nothing that I talk about when it comes to all these things should dissuade anyone from voting, and particularly on the local level, where you can probably have a lot more influence. But we'll also have to talk about on the show high-level kingmakers and gatekeepers, because they also exist. And we've talked a lot on this program about deep states and swamps and shadow governments and powerful people with very deep pockets. It takes a lot of money to destroy a nation, a lot of money to put certain people into power. And it's very naive to think that this hasn't been going on for a very long time. And that's why I do history sessions like the Dulles brothers, for example. It's to connect dots so you can see how long this has been going on. So there's an element of common sense regarding human nature in this first article. So with that in mind, here is, and it's an editorial. Sometimes I read editorials, and they're not necessarily headlines, but I only pick those that are from people that really have complete thoughts about a particular subject. So if it's an editorial, there are things in it possibly that you'll agree with and things that you won't agree with, and that's great. There's sometimes things I don't agree with in them, but the overriding point they're making is worth bringing out to you. So you can always comments at standingforthetruth.com. I'd love to hear from you about some of these editorials. And this one is Daniel Greenfield, and he's really, really quite good at this. It's called Who's Running the Country? Now, if you answered power-hungry, narcissistic political hacks, you are not wrong. But let me know what you think about this anyway. Who's running the country? The 2016 presidential election was going to come down to two candidates, Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, whose turns had come. And then Donald Trump rode down an escalator, took their turn. And the establishment has never been the same since, because it was their turn. In 2020, it was the turn of Joe Biden, a man whose only political credential was that he had stuck around long enough to stick to things like the Senate and the vice presidency. Now in 2024, it's Joe Biden's turn again. No one in his party was under the impression that he was the best candidate, the best campaigner, or the best president, but it was his turn. And now the Democrats are panicking because the candidate taking his turn is imploding. Trying to get the party leaders to confront their candidate and ask him to step down is not a simple thing. But how do you take away Biden's turn when turns are the most sacred thing in politics? Okay, this is interesting. It's not an exclusively Democrat problem. The GOP put up Bob Dole against Bill Clinton and John McCain against Obama because it was their turns. They let Mitt Romney go up against Obama a second time because it was his turn. And after Republicans lost 2 straight presidential elections because they ran establishment candidates taking their turn, voters were so sick of it that they did what they would have never done before and picked Trump. So sometimes when we talk about rhinos, we're talking about people who are just in the rotation, okay? And Daniel says, because it wasn't Trump's turn. Turn politics mostly still rules. Candidates past their prime go up to bat because they have the biggest networks of fellow politicians, donors, and party activists. It's as if Major League Baseball favored players on the basis of seniority and how well they networked, not based on how well they can pitch or hit. But unlike sports, politics isn't a meritocracy. It isn't even a democracy. It's an oligarchy. Voters self-importantly think of elections as big political competition, like sports. But that's like judging companies based on the keynote addresses of their CEOs. Elections are the least important part of politics. All the really important parts of politics happen behind closed doors. What politicians do isn't run for office. They network. They cut deals. They plan their careers. That network, which we occasionally call by the wholly inadequate names like establishment or insiders, is the reason Biden is up again in 24 and why he can't be gotten rid of. People who naively think that Obama is secretly running the Biden administration don't understand the network or how it works. Obama took on Hillary when it was her turn in 2008. He won and brokered a deal that moved the Democrat network further left. And he did the same thing again in 2020, bringing in Sanders' people and Elizabeth Warren's people and his own people, so the Biden admin is even more radical and extreme than Obama's was. Where did Obama come from? He came out of that network of radical activists, donors, and government personnel now running the country. Obama is not a brilliant genius or one-man dynamo. He was a lazy and unoriginal activist lawyer, one of tens of thousands of Ivy Leaguers who joined the political side of the network who wanted to live out his egotistical ambitions. And the leftist networks gave him the opportunity to do it in exchange for seeding it deeper across the Democrat Party, the government, and the country. Then his time came. Obama didn't want Biden to succeed him. He pushed Biden out in favor of Hillary and then tried to bring in a surprise candidate to run against him in 2020. But some things are sacred. It's not really Biden's turn, though. It's the turn of the strategists, lobbyists, staffers, donors, allies, and more nebulous figures known as friends, quote-unquote, who he has accrued over the years. They're invested in his success, they're profiting from it, and they won't easily give up. Trying to replace Biden with Gavin Newsom, aside from the legal and the logistical issues, would be a clash of two networks that would require either careful negotiations or outright civil war. It's done all the time with primary rivals who become vice presidents or cabinet members. But displacing a sitting president who won the nomination, asterisk, and has raised and spent a massive fortune would require a level of delicate negotiations akin to bringing peace to an African civil war. Especially if that president is unstable, prone to fits of anger, and is insulated by the same political allies whose wealth and power depend on Biden winning another term. It's not just about Jill and Hunter Biden. Joe Biden has tens of thousands of political mouths to feed. Money has been collected, favors promised. People have bought homes in D.C. bedroom communities. Lobbyists have secured fat contracts, and donors have opened up their wallets. Replacing Biden with another candidate would upend much of D.C., put tens of billions of dollars in flux, and create massive instability in a corrupt local economy. Much of D.C. would rather ride it out, especially since the campaign people will make just as much money if Biden loses, and preserve the integrity of the networks and the illicit pinky swears that allow special interests to buy influence without having to worry if their man will suddenly be swapped out. That is what "it's his turn" really means. It's not impossible for the Dems to replace Biden, despite all of the orange man bad alarmism that is their only campaign slogan. None of them view him as enough of an existential threat to disrupt a political way of life, which allowed a mediocre grifter like Biden to get this far. People who don't understand that were baffled that Biden would run and that he would get the nomination. After his disastrous debate showing much of the party panicked and outsiders assumed they would dump Biden, the truth is the Democrats wish they could. Turn corruption once again threatens the survival of the party, but they can't break away from it because parties are vehicles of careerism and cash. The networks around powerful politicians build careers and move money, and those networks are running the country. So when people ask who's been running the country after his debate performance, the answer is that it's the same people who run most of the government and have all along. Politicians in a state of obvious mental decline like Biden or Feinstein, who go on introducing bills and signing legislation and tweeting and expressing opinions in their press conferences. Oh, it got cut off. Sorry about that. I can't read that sentence. Not just Biden, but many, if not most, elected officials are figureheads who exist to broker favorable arrangements between their personal networks of donors and staffers and those of other elected officials and the ones in the bureaucracy that actually make policy. The revolving door between corporations, staffers, personnel, appointees, and lobbyists who move between administrations, offices, boards, corporations, think tanks, and firms is the actual force that runs the country more than most elections. Politicians play their part, meeting, greeting, and signing off on what they're told will be good for their careers within the network that they are part of. And this really shouldn't surprise us. I mean, this is human nature. This is how people operate. The politicians don't operate in some vacuum where they try to do everything that's good for the country. They are absolutely influenced and influencing. Daniel goes on to say, if they build up enough cachet, one day it will also be their turn to be at the top. That's why Democrats can't solve the Biden problem. The issue isn't one man's decline, but a systemic crisis. Biden embodies what the Democrats and the two-party system in politics really is, and while getting him out may fix the immediate problem, it won't fix the system. Biden is a test of how much the system is willing to risk and how high a public implosion it's willing to tolerate to protect the sacred right of the turn. Will Democrats let their party go down to protect the system? Will they go on lying to their voters and their donors? Will the media, which briefly broke away from the lies after the debate, resume going along with the scam? Other Bidens, some elderly, confused, and inept like Joe, others middle-aged, confused, and inept like Kamala, and even some young, confused, and inept like AOC, fill the system because they are how the system works. It's not a meritocracy that elevates the best, a democracy chosen by people, but an oligarchy that runs the system and is the system. How interesting and not surprising. Another article with just a couple of just comments. Some of these articles I just like to read a comment. Here's a tweet. I still call them tweets because what are you going to call them, X's? This gentleman says, it's really hard to put that democracy is on the ballot. Talking point out. Okay, it's really hard to put that democracy is on the ballot talking point out there when the guy saying it is also saying that only God can remove him from office. And that's this headline on Zero Hedge. D.C. in turmoil as Biden says only act of God will dislodge him. Which, he may not be wrong about that because God installs kings and takes out kings. So, they're saying it's all going to collapse this week when Congress returns, so that's something we need to keep an eye on. Anyway, very, very interesting stuff. And I want to add to this. I do think that Trump really cares about this country. I think he genuinely loves people, and people know that because he's not cut from any Washington cloth. He's not a career politician, and people know this. They would never give him a turn, and they won't give him another turn. But he has put his sanity on the line, I think, to try and right the ship in America, even though it's not possible in 4 years. And he's had to endure ridiculous levels of persecution, and he still keeps going. He's 76 years old. How much is too much? And this is why they hate him so intently. So let me know what you think about all that. Very, very interesting. All right. Leo Hohmann has an article about Klaus Schwab speaking at a summer confab of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, in China. Globalist frontman Klaus Schwab tells elitist followers that they must force humanity into a world ruled by AI and other dehumanizing technologies. World Economic Forum founder and director Klaus Schwab, speaking at the WEF's recently concluded summer meeting in China, bet you didn't know they had one, has informed his elitist followers that ushering in the globalist agenda will require humanity to be forced into a collaboration with the unelected organization. And the time for forced collaboration has now arrived. Schwab made the declaration during his opening remarks at the WEF's annual meeting of the New Champions, also known as the Summer Davos in China. The meeting of the New Champions. Sounds like a rock anthem. He praised China for its economic policies, which are seen by the globalists as the model of top-down, centralized planning in a high-tech surveillance state run through smart cities, smart EVs, smart homes, appliances, meters, AI, digital IDs, and CBDCs, all of which have one thing in common. They come with on-off switches, not under the control of the end user, that's us, which is we the people. In their ideal world, we live as slaves at the privilege of our masters. We get out of line, they cut off our electric power, our electric car, our electric digital money, and everything. Schwab told the elitist participants gathered in China that they must force humanity into a collaboration with the unelected WEF. This is why Schwab told his globalist comrades at a previous meeting 2 years ago to expect an angrier world. When you force people to live in ways that controvert their best interests, it tends to make them angry. Imagine that. They know their policies related to a green economy, perpetual wars, severe restrictions on travel, farming, eating meat, and a host of other activities considered crucial to a middle-class lifestyle will be extremely unpopular and cause civil wars on top of the world war they already have planned. And we are going to talk about wars and rumors of wars shortly here. Remember, as the 2023 Global Government Summit, the globalists told us there would need to be a shock event in order to usher in a new world order. Now they're being even more honest and telling us that we're going to be forced to accept their new world order. So here's a quote from Mr. Schwab. To drive future economic growth, we must embrace innovation and force the collaboration across sectors, regions, nations, and cultures to create a more peaceful, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future. At this critical juncture, the active participation of all stakeholders is essential to ensure a sustainable development path. Blah, blah, blah. This is a typical soundbite from a guy like that. AI could have written that, and probably did. Of course, the biggest stakeholders of all, those paying taxes to fund governments, have no seat at the table in Schwab's elitist meetings, and that's by design. We are seen by these globalist predators as useless eaters, part of a herd that needs to be culled in order to preserve global resources for themselves. That's what Malthusians believe. Schwab returned to the topic of the Fourth Industrial Revolution while doubling down on the theme of this year's meeting, saying that there are limits to growth. In globalist speak, limits to growth is code for active depopulation agenda. One tweet says, the theme of this annual meeting is next frontiers for growth, but actually what we've seen in the presentations is that there are limits to growth, provided we use technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution in a wise manner, said Klaus Schwab at the summer Davos. Limits to Growth is the title of a key globalist tome published by the Club of Rome in 1972. One of the co-authors of Limits to Growth, Dennis Meadows, said 6 years ago in an interview that the world's population must be reduced from the current 8 billion down to 1 or 2 billion. I think it's less than that. He says he hopes this massive depopulation could be done in a peaceful way. Isn't that special? And Meadows says he'd like to see a smart dictatorship. So if you put the word smart in front of just about anything, you can sell it to the people of the earth. He said he'd like to see a smart dictatorship brought upon the earth. This is the global technocracy in which people's lives are ruled by scientists, engineers, and other experts. Politicians, if they even exist under this vision for humanity, will be figureheads only. And then he goes on to talk about whether Biden is actually in charge of anything. And we've talked about that already briefly. Anyone who believes Biden is making his own decisions or any important decisions from day one is gullible and deceived. Okay, and that's kind of the end of that particular article. They are ready to replace him with a new puppet. The new puppet will look prettier and speak smoother, but he or she will no more be in charge of his or her actions than President Biden has been. So that's what's going on in Davos at this particular time of year. Now, it's important to connect prophecy dots when we address the political landscape, because the Bible clearly warns about a global economy that facilitates a global governing authority that demands total allegiance and subservience, largely fulfilled in a post-rapture world. There's a shock event. If Schwab and company are looking for a shock event, how about that? And this is forming rapidly behind the scenes, this one world everything. And once that switch is flipped, several dominoes will fall. Even if prophecy takes us to places we'd rather not go in this country, we're going anyway. So we have to maintain the balance above prophecy when we're looking at the headlines. And that's always in the back of my mind when I read these headlines, trying to connect the dots between the political, viewing things through a political lens versus a prophetic lens. All right, I'm going to start another one here before the break, and then I may have to cut it in half here. But this is from our Wars and Rumors of Wars department, which seems to be putting in a lot of overtime these days. 10 signs that a global war is rapidly approaching, from prophecynewswatch.com. Are we on the verge of an apocalyptic global war in which billions could die? Very few people anticipated that World War I would erupt, but it happened. Very few people anticipated World War II would erupt, but it happened anyway. All through human history, there have been wars. Ever since the beginning, it's been just a matter of time before major powers collide. Unfortunately, even though very alarming warning signals are flashing all around us, most of the population of the Western world seems clueless about what is really going on out there. Leaders from all over the planet seem to have come down with a really bad case of war fever. Wonder if there's a jab for that. And preparations for apocalyptic showdowns are being made, and these are 10 signs that global war is rapidly approaching. And I'll get started with this and we'll continue it after the break. Number 1, Politico is reporting that Israel and Hezbollah have both drafted battle plans, and the Biden admin is convinced that intense fighting is likely to break out. As you said, the IDF and Hezbollah have drafted battle plans and are in the process of trying to procure additional weapons, according to 2 senior U.S. officials briefed on intelligence. Number 2, Iran is warning that there will be an obliterating war if the IDF enters southern Lebanon. And they've been talking about this now for the last 10 days or so. And here's a quote from Iran's permanent mission to the UN on Friday. Israel will face an obliterating war if it embarks on full-scale military aggression against Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's the quote. And they actually had just announced it on Twitter, so apparently that's where we get our headlines. Get our big news from Iran on Twitter. Iran deems as psychological warfare the Zionist regime's propaganda about intending to attack Lebanon should it embark on a full-scale military aggression, and obliterating war will ensue. All options, including the full involvement of all resistant fronts, are on the table, so Iran is itching for a war. By resistance fronts, Iran means not just Hezbollah and Hamas, but the Houthi rebels in Yemen, as well as other groups in Syria and Iraq. Number 3 sign that war is on the horizon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is convinced that a war with Iran is inevitable because he believes that the Iranians have planned to conquer the entire Middle East. Now, you students of Ezekiel 38 and 39 know that Persia, which has only been Iran for, 80 years now, Persia and Russia head up this coalition to attack Israel. So that's very interesting in light of their desire, and we've always known that they want to conquer the entire Middle East, but I believe God has other plans. Netanyahu emphasized that the fight against Iran's terror proxies is critical for other nations in the Middle East as Iran aims to dominate the rest of the region, including Sunni Muslim nations. Good luck with that, Iran. I mean, Israel is defending the West. Israel is defending our way of life, just so you know that. All right, number 5. Number 4 is not even in here. Okay, one more quick thing. The USS Wasp, an amphibious assault ship, and Marines from the 24th Expeditionary Unit moved into the Mediterranean last Wednesday to join the dock landing ship USS Oak Hill and another ship in their amphibious ready group. According to the Marine Corps, the Wasp will operate in the eastern Mediterranean to be ready for a military-assisted departure and other missions. So that's a little cryptic, but, we kind of know what that means. We can read between the lines. So this is Headline Day. This is Mary Danielsen. You're listening to Stand Up for the Truth, and we're talking about 10 signs that there is a war in the Wars and Rumors department on the horizon. And we are going to do 5 through 10 when I come back. And so thank you for joining me today. We will be back in 2 minutes with more headlines.
Saturday, July 20th is time for some high-kicking comedy at the Cup of Joy with Carrie Pomerali. I do think turning 40 has its values. Like, you get superpowers you didn't have before. Like, I can hurt myself sleeping.
Come see Carrie Pomerali as she debuts her womanly witticisms at 6:15 and 8:15 at the Cup of Joy.
You go to physical therapy, they're like, what'd you do, ma'am? I was like, I woke up, Skippy, okay? I woke up.
It's a 2-show night, 6:15 and 8:15 with Carrie Pomerali, Saturday, July 20th, the Cup of Joy.
Like, I rode a horse, and I bought the horse on Groupon. It was $5, and I get on the horse, and immediately my body's like, no, you didn't. And then the horse was like, get off, lady, you're so fat. Get off.
Cup of Joy supporting Q90 FM.
Q90 FM presents the Police Lights of Christmas, helping over 70 police departments across Wisconsin.
Each department is going to leave this night with a box full of thousands of dollars worth of gift cards.
Visit lightsofchristmas.us. Police Lights of Christmas, a ministry of Q90 FM.
Feedback, questions, and topic suggestions are always appreciated. Email us at comments@standupforthetruth.com.
Welcome back to Stand Up for the Truth for July the 9th. And we're doing some headlines today as our guest became ill and is unable to join us, but she'll be with us in August. And we're talking about 10 reasons why a global war is rapidly approaching, 10 signs that global war is rapidly approaching. And I need to get a new printer because number 4 fell off the page. But here it is. Number 4, according to NBC News, the U.S. is moving military assets into position so that they can be ready to evacuate Americans once an all-out war erupts between Israel and Hezbollah. In other words, not if, but when. It says the Pentagon is moving U.S. military assets closer to Israel and Lebanon, according to 3 U.S. defense officials and a former U.S. official familiar with the plans. And then, now this is where this comes in, the USS Wasp, an amphibious assault ship, and Marines from the 24th Expeditionary Unit, which is special operations capable, moved into the Mediterranean last Wednesday to join the dock landing ship USS Oak Hill and another ship in their amphibious-ready group, according to the Marine Corps. The Wasp will operate in the eastern Mediterranean to be ready for a military-assisted departure and other missions, the officials said. So that was number 4. Number 5, on Thursday, Hezbollah sent approximately 40 rockets into northern Israel. Hezbollah launched a barrage of some 40 rockets at northern Israel on Thursday afternoon, and this is last week, so things are always changing. And what the terror group said was a response to recent Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, including the killing of one of its operatives earlier in the day. Number 6, on Saturday, Israeli aircraft bombed several Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. On Saturday afternoon Israeli fighter jets struck a building in southern Lebanon's district where a group of Hezbollah operatives were gathered, the military said. The IDF said the operations were spotted by troops of the 869th Combat Intelligence Collection Unit, and a short while later the airstrike was carried out. They also struck another building used by Hezbollah. So it's always ramping up over there. Number 7. Biden is thinking about approving a plan that would allow U.S. military contractors to deploy in Ukraine. How sneaky is that? President Biden's administration is moving toward a plan that would allow U.S. military contractors to deploy to Ukraine for the first time in a limited capacity, according to CNN. 4 U.S. officials familiar with the matter told the outlet that the policy is being worked on to allow the Pentagon to issue private contracts to send troops for the maintenance and repair of U.S.-supplied systems in Ukraine. Number 8, Russian President. Speaking of angry Russian presidents, Russian President Putin reportedly interested in developing a coalition of nations that would rival NATO. Rhetoric from Vladimir Putin about a Eurasian security condition is part of a Kremlin plan to create a group of Moscow-friendly countries to rival the West and NATO. The assessment by the Washington, D.C. think tank Institution for the Study of War follows Putin's visit to North Korea, which one international security expert told Newsweek has deepened an already intensifying relationship of convenience between Moscow and Pyongyang. Number 9, Putin is also warning that Russia will need to begin production of intermediate-range nuclear weapons systems. Russia must respond to the actions of the U.S., and it seems it's necessary for the country to start production of intermediate-range nuclear forces. Strike systems, Russian President Putin said on Friday. Talk about your rhetoric. They already have technical nuclear weapons. a lot of them. So here's just more ramping up and more escalation. Number 10, a very influential figure in Russian foreign policy circles, is suggesting that the Russians should actually detonate a nuclear device in order to show the world how serious they are. Dmitry Suslov, a top figure at the Moscow-based Council for Foreign and Defense Policy, has put forward the idea of Russia carrying out a demonstrative nuclear detonation that could prompt the start of World War III. This alarming suggestion arises as tensions with the West intensify due to Ukraine's use of Western-supplied weaponry against Russian forces, and Putin does not care for that. Suslov's think tank, known to occasionally sway government policy, made this proposal public shortly after Putin delivered a grave warning to NATO countries. He warned that if Ukraine were to employ Western arms for attacks on Russian soil, it could spark a worldwide crisis. So, here's the bottom line on this. It says, unfortunately, all this is happening at a time when 72% of U.S. voters believe the guy with his finger on the nuclear button does not have the mental or cognitive health to serve as president. Oh, yes, indeed. All right, that's the latest on the Wars and Rumors of Wars department. Let's go over to Europe here. There's quite a bit to talk about there. Not just the French elections, but they also have something called the Digital Services Act. This is an EU censorship super weapon. And there's a lot of bureaucratic babble here, but you'll get the general idea as I go along. You'll understand exactly what this means. The Digital Services Act creates a unified framework for government-directed content moderation across the European Union. Each EU member state now has a digital services coordinator with the power to penalize online platforms if they fail to adequately address quote-unquote systemic risks, including hate speech and misinformation. These official speech commissars can deputize third-party entities to act as trusted flaggers, empowering the global network of NGOs, research institutes, and private companies that make up the censorship industry. Yes, it is definitely an industry. Elon Musk's X became the first platform to be investigated after the DSA took effect, after months of threats from EU officials over Musk's attempts to restore free speech to the platform. The Digital Services Act, which went into effect at the start of 2024, is the European Union's flagship online censorship law. Other than China's Great Firewall, what a great name, it is arguably the most elaborate and wide-reaching instrument of government control of online content in the world. The law creates censorship obligations for what it terms very large online platforms, VLOPS, and very large online search engines, VLOES. This category, which includes any platform or search engine with over 45 million users in the EU, is subject to the law's most stringent censorship requirements, with a hefty fine of 6% of the provider's annual global annual turnover levied in the event of noncompliance. It's going to cost them a lot of money to not censor everything. So they have to develop tools. Every country has to develop tools to identify, analyze, and assess systemic risks related to their service, then put measures in place to mitigate these risks. In other words, the EU wants platforms to identify and suppress content proactively. Okay, so when something gets put out there on YouTube, and we saw this at the beginning of COVID, when something is put out there, after the fact, these I don't know what you call them, these trusted flaggers, would go through the content and decide whether to keep it or get rid of it. And they got rid of an awful lot of content. And I think we all know that. This is proactive. That's interesting because there's no mind reading going on, but there is going to be this sense that you're just going to be canceled. You are going to be censored. These platforms will be censored, and all those who are part of this social are similarly far-reaching. There are several types of anything that public security and electoral processes, gender-based violence, discrimination, or illegal content. Under EU law and the law of many EU member states, illegal content includes so-called hate speech, which is a pretext to criminally penalize political candidates and members of the public for political expression in a number of European countries. Informational threats to public security and electoral processes are also a tried and true pretext for censoring political opposition. Election integrity was the main pretext used by U.S. government-tied groups to censor American political speech during the 2020 election. So we have 27 EU member states, and they're going to have this bureaucracy, this bloated bureaucracy, to make sure you don't say anything that you shouldn't be saying, and that is the bottom line. But wait, there's more, all right? That was the law as it was designed. That was this bloated bureaucracy as it was designed. But now, in 2024, that was late 2023. In 2024, they've expanded it. They have new moderation rules. It's going to cover a lot more of the internet. Up until now, only the large platforms and search engines had to abide by this Digital Services Act. But starting this last early spring, all but the smallest online platforms are going to have to comply. Basically says, I mentioned the very large online platforms and the very large online search engines. I like that, very large. Now it's going to cover the law. I don't know how this works or how they can all of a sudden, was this a built-in time bomb that at some point it would just change to cover all of the internet? Because it says it will now cover thousands of online platforms. The Associated Press notes this will include household names like eBay and OnlyFans, which didn't hit 45 million monthly active users. That was the original threshold. Only small services with fewer than 50 employees will be exempt. So all of a sudden, everybody is going to be censored here. The DSA's obligations include a ban on targeting underage users with ads based on their personal data, targeting anyone based on sensitive data like sexual preferences or religious beliefs. Sites will have to provide a reason. This is interesting. When it comes to content moderation, sites will have to provide a reason to users when their content or account has been moderated, or shall I say, completely canceled, and offer them a way of complaining and challenging the decision. There are also rules around giving users the ability to flag illegal goods and services found on a platform. They want you to know that you transgressed. I don't think for a second that they have anyone's best interest in mind, that you're going to want to challenge this decision. I think that will backfire. But they want you to know what you did and why you did it. So, Digital Services Act rules apply to all online platforms accessed by users in the EU. So, very interesting stuff, and this, I'm guessing this will come to our country too. This is bureaucracy at its finest. You do get the general idea. But the big question is, who will get to define what actually constitutes misinformation and disinformation? Surely it will be the job of an independent regulator or judicial authority with at least, parameters and no conflicts of interest. Yes, the ultimate decider will be the EU Commission. So, speaking of Europe, and I just have a few minutes to talk about the national suicide of France. We talked about a couple weeks ago, Europe lurching to the right. And the right or conservative side in Europe is the populist, just like it is here. The conservative is the populist and the left is the establishment, okay? So we need to keep that in mind. I mentioned the EU parliamentary elections a couple weeks ago that took place over the course of 3 days starting at the beginning of June. No one has made the headlines like France, and they're in the headlines even today. When the right side of the aisle under Marine Le Pen won the parliament of the day, now Macron is president, okay, but this is parliamentary elections. Macron, when she won, he's a centrist. And he was so unglued by the fact that she could win parliament that he disbanded the parliament and called for new elections. Well, what happened over the weekend? I have two articles that will help you keep all the players straight. The characters in this play are Marine Le Pen, conservative, and that it's the National Rally Party. There's Macron, the centrist, current president until 2027. Then there's Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and his new Popular Front Party, also referred to as France Unbowed. They are the communists and the jihadists. They want you to think they represent the populace, but as I indicated, conservatives are generally the populist party here in 2024, but the media is always confused about that, even in America. So, French elections. Riots erupt after left-wing coalition wins plurality of seats. Crowds of protesters and celebrators flooded the streets of Paris as French election results began pouring in on Sunday. On Sunday, Prime Minister, so now we have another gentleman in the mix, the French Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, announced his intent to resign after a far-left political coalition was poised to win a plurality of French parliamentary seats. The coalition had unexpectedly assembled before the snap elections began. Tens of thousands of left-wing demonstrators gathered in Paris on Sunday to celebrate the news. Emmanuel Macron's centrist coalition is projected to take second place. The results were a huge upset for conservatives in France, who had hoped that the National Rally would take power. But this article says, and this is Daniel Greenfield again, communists and Islamists take France. A movement aimed at destroying France will now be in a prime position to do so. The story of both the UK, who elected also a left-winger, and French elections is down to liberal establishments allying with and empowering the worst Islamists and communists to come to power. For that matter, it's the story of this current administration in the U.S. The difference between the UK and France, though, is that Labour appeared to have cleaned up its act enough that it was no longer a bunch of Marxists and jihadists, as it had been previously in the UK. But it didn't take long to find out it's the same bunch under the hood. In France, they didn't even bother pretending. Macron, who had bet hard on the public rallying to him against the National Rally and Marine Le Pen's conservatives, was crushed, and he decided to ally with the communists and jihadists represented by Jean-Luc Mélenchon and his France Unbowed party. The NFP benefited from posturing as populists in an anti-incumbent election, but the Macron alliance made it clear that it was the National Rally which was populist, and the NFP, the commies, is the establishment. So the media, of course, they have nothing bad to say about this event. And the article says by Daniel Greenfield, the question in every election is, can it get worse? And the answer is, obviously, it can. A movement aimed at destroying France will now be in prime position to do so, at least through radically accelerating demographic change. That's bad news for France, for Europe, and for humans. This gentleman says, I'll never understand why the authorities in so many Western European countries are dead set on importing and accommodating as many Islamopithecines as possible. They aren't even a reliable voter bloc, like the Democrats here think illegal aliens are. So the Prime Minister in France has been kept in place by Mr. Macron for the stability of the country, even though he wants out. He said he does not like the fact that Macron has decision to call these surprise elections because Marine Le Pen had won. I don't know, that's very tyrannical if you ask me. The results of 2 rounds of voting left no obvious path to form a government for the leftist coalition that came in first. Macron came in second, and the right came in third. And it ends with Macron has 3 years remaining on his presidential term. Rather than rallying behind Macron as he'd hoped, millions took the vote as an opportunity to vent anger about inflation, crime, immigration, and other grievances, including his style of government. I don't know. There is no real mandate, so there is no one that has reached that point of the number of seats. That means that they actually won one, so it's a bigger mess than you think. Leo Hohmann makes some interesting thoughts here. He says, over 200 French election candidates quit to stop Le Pen. Le Pen had the most votes. She won everywhere except Paris. But the people don't matter. The establishment wins in France. He's suggesting that this is a pattern that could happen here. He says, when you control the street and the media messaging, you never run out of options in the battle between good and evil. And right now, evil controls both of those key worldly battlefields. They also control big tech, the most powerful militaries, law enforcement, the centers of education, the legal and medical establishment, as we saw during COVID. It's becoming apparent the globalists are not in panic mode at all, like so many on the right are fond of telling us. They can still manipulate elections and the narratives through corrupt media outlets, which they also own. This is the interesting part. The globalist power elites allow voices to rise up on the right, like Marine Le Pen in France, Nigel Farage in the UK, and Donald Trump in the US, only to shoot them down at a time of their choosing. Like ducks rising up over an open marsh field, they get picked off by hidden hunters just as they appear to be gaining flight. And once the rightward populist political leader gets shot down, his or her followers immediately get marginalized, demonized, and blamed for the destruction that they, the globalists, have caused. Meantime, the globalist minions take to the airwaves to congratulate themselves for saving the republic from the fascists, labeling their enemies with the tags that belong on their own foreheads. Leo Holman says the same fate awaits Trump that just crushed Le Pen, and violence will ensue. It's like they're daring the right to rise up violently and say, enough. Their leftist provocateurs are all too ready to engage in a street brawl, and so I believe it's wise for us to not take the bait. Because if we do, we know whose side the police and military will come down on. The more we remain peaceful, the more it drives them crazy, to the point where, as we see in France, they will burn down their cities regardless of whether they win or lose. In the end, these people are consumed by a spirit of destruction. Whether you live in France, the U.S., UK, Germany, Australia, or Canada, it's not our job to jump in and help these globalists commit national suicide. They're perfectly capable of destroying themselves over time, because while they crave power, they are wholly incapable of wielding it responsibly. Pray for peace, prepare for war. So that's what Leo has to say about that. And it's also an editorial, so there are things in there you might not agree with, and we don't know exactly what is going to happen. But this is an interesting headline from today. France's Mélenchon promises to recognize a Palestinian state. Oh, surprise. And that is, that's going to happen as soon as he gets a microphone, I guess. This is Jewish News Service. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, leader of France Unbowed, a key member of the victorious left-wing New Popular Front coalition, said his government would recognize the state of Palestine as soon as possible. He made his remarks to a large gathering of supporters following the win. Recognizing a Palestinian state has been a key campaign promise of New Popular Front. At a rally in May, he said France must recognize the state now. Other France Unbowed members reiterated the promise within 2 weeks, according to one in that party, said within 2 weeks. So that's something to keep an eye on. This New Popular Front has condemned Israel's Gaza operations, no surprises there, calling it a genocide. Mélenchon has been accused of anti-Semitism. Well, it's probably true. He's refused to call Hamas a terrorist group. When France reported a 300% increase in anti-Semitic attacks in the first 3 months of this year, he said that French Jew hatred was residual. I'm not sure what that means. 2 weeks after the October 7th attack, he accused the Jewish president of the National Assembly, then paying a solidarity visit to Israel, of camping out in Tel Aviv to encourage the massacre. So that is something we want to keep an eye on. So much is going on. Don't have enough time to read what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the wise and the foolish virgins, and I might save that for Thursday. I have Natural Headline Day on Thursday. There's so much to catch up on. I think this would be a great one. I also have a commentary by the gal who is going to be with us this morning, Holly Varnum. And she says, have you stepped out of your comfort zone lately? And that would be a great way to end. I don't have time for that this morning. But I will read that on Thursday because I think it's well worth our time. Another article, woke churches continue to spread their poison and infect the next generation. That also is very interesting because of what's going on in the Presbyterian Church. And I'll just start this one. I've got a minute or so, and we'll finish it on Thursday. In the book of Jeremiah, we are reminded of the dangers of people pretending to speak for God when in fact they are spreading lies. Jeremiah 14:14 says, "The prophets are prophesying lies in my name. I have not sent them or appointed them or spoken to them. They are prophesying to you false visions, divinations, idolatries, and the delusions of their own minds." And here's just one example of woke and how far it's gone in the churches. A recent example, this is a Presbyterian pastor, Rebecca Peters, who preached that if Jesus were giving his Sermon on the Mount today, he might add, "Blessed are those who end pregnancies, for they will be known for their loving kindness." I think that we all know how far this has gone. And the number one thing we want to do, and I will finish this on Thursday, is to stick to the gospel. And the woke movement in the churches is gone so far. This is just one example. She has this Planned Parenthood stole that she wears when she preaches. It's just disgusting. It's grievous and all that. Talk about the wise and the foolish. Wow, we're going to tie those two things in on Thursday. So stay tuned for headlines on that day. And on Friday, we have Brian Young. Brian Young is a creation scientist from Nebraska. And we had him in town many, many years ago, and he wants to be on stand-up. And I'm looking forward to having him on stand-up. Also, tomorrow is Wednesday. Yes, and we have Frank Figueroa. That is a replay. So looking forward to all these things. And July is a full month. We have a lot of new people and people that we have had on before. So it'll be a great month full of fresh podcasts. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Have a great day on purpose.